the Director of Public Works. I think I've met many of you. I know many of you. We've also, I guess, ganged up on you tonight since we might have more people than you do, but brought a few extras here. So Derek Sari there is our Assistant Director, Lisa Lane, our Town Engineer, Jim Stewart, our Facilities Manager, Josh Van Houten, a new member of the team. He's our Water and Sewer Operations Manager. And then Maria Elena Ruggieri is our Business Administrator. So brought them because they contributed significantly to the development of our plan, and they're an important part of the team. And so when I screw up, they can chime in and clarify things. But we are prepared to show a relatively quick briefing or presentation to get you familiar with what we're asking about. I know you mentioned the agenda is buildings, and then I think DPW is listed next. I just mashed it all together, so I'm gonna run through the whole thing together if that's okay with everybody.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. So we're looking for your support for our capital funding requests. Basically two things here. I'm going to describe the situation, kind of give you some context, and really that's the bulk of what we'll talk about. I think that if we can articulate to you, the methodology we've used and why we're coming to the town with these requests, the individual requests that we'll talk about at the second half of this is, I think that will be, they're pretty straightforward. We're asking for a truck, and we'll show you a picture of a truck, but really it's the methodology that we want you to understand and hopefully support as we go through. So we'll get started. Many of you have seen this chart here, but I think it's important to start with what we do, why we exist. And so these three things here listed: deliver essential services, set conditions for the future, and strengthen the foundation, are what we define internally to the DPW as how we define success. And so essential services, we do that every day by providing all those things listed there routinely. Set conditions for the future, that's what we're talking about now. And then strengthen the foundation, that's about getting the right people and making sure they're trained and ready to do the job we're asking them to do. So really what we're going to talk about tonight is this piece here, this asset life cycle. So we're trying to take the approach that everything we touch and work with in the Department of Public Works is an asset. And so there's a life cycle to it, and you can see the things that define that life cycle. And what we're talking about tonight is replacing some things because we think they've come to the end of their life cycle, or we need to add some things to our infrastructure to make it, function better for the town. So this chart just summarizes the key pieces of the infrastructure across the town, and we're certainly not going to talk about everything on here, and I'm not going to go over all these things on this slide, but it's a representation of assets we have across the town, and each one of them has their own life cycle and requires its own plan for how we want to sustain it over the course of its life. Tonight we'll talk about the vehicles, and then we'll hit some water and sewer, and then not reflected on this chart are our buildings. So recently the town made an adjustment, and so we've merged the Buildings and Grounds Department with the Department of Public Works, and so eventually that will get merged into this as well, but certainly those buildings are important assets to the town. This is not something I'm asking you to read. I know it's probably difficult to read, lots of words and numbers, but it's a representation of one of our capital plans. So this would be water. So at the last town meeting we held, I guess about a week ago, the town supported this first one here for Flanders Road. That's a water main replacement. And this chart just shows it's typical for a capital plan, how we're gonna tackle our distribution system over the coming years. And it won't necessarily happen exactly as this thing lays out, but it's at least our starting point for a plan. And this is just a representation of how we want to manage all of our assets so that we can show you and the town, where we anticipate spending money, and the idea behind it is to spread that cost out over time and make sure our infrastructure is functioning as we need it to throughout its lifespan. So this is where we'll start talking a little more specifically about what we're asking for tonight. And my understanding is that, the committee is really looking at the merits of each request and not necessarily focused on the dollar value per se, although we all know that that's important. And so I wanted to highlight that up front. So what this shows is on the left side here, the things we're going to talk about tonight. And important to know is that we're funding out of 3 different sources, or we're recommending funding out of 3 different sources. So free cash, that's coming out of our general budget. That's tax money. And then water and sewer, those are, ratepayers pay for that. And so I think it's an important distinction, because if you add this bottom line up down here, it's probably close to $700,000, but we're not asking for $700,000 to come out of our free cash for the town. We're being equitable to make sure that ratepayers for water and sewer also are funding the capital improvements we're asking for. And so I won't go through all of these numbers, but the point is that right here, this $232,000, if you look across the town, and I'm ballparking this, I think we spend, or at least get close to about $1 million a year on capital improvements and these type of capital improvements. And aside from the school department, we probably have the largest share in terms of infrastructure and requirements that we put on the table. And I think it's important to highlight that despite that, we're only talking about, if it's $1 million, 20%, 25% of that. And so I think that's important to remember as we do look at dollars down the road and have to make tough decisions about where to spend money. So the first thing we'll talk about is the vehicle fleet. And, I'm not trying to insult anybody, and I'm certainly not trying to, give you every nitnoid detail of the Department of Public Works, but in terms of context, these pictures here represent our key vehicle fleet. So we have about 55 key vehicles, and they're organized according to these pictures. So we've got 1-ton trucks, which are, people drive them on a daily basis to get around town and do routine maintenance tasks. We have these dump trucks, which carry all the material we have to bring around town, but they also do a lot of snow plowing for us. We've got backhoes that dig trenches, loaders that move material around. So if we want to load a truck with salt, we got to have a loader. A catch basin cleaner. So we're mandated by the state to comply with permits relating to stormwater, and we have to clean various stormwater structures around the town. That's what this truck does for us. A water and sewer truck. So similar to the catch basin cleaner, we have requirements around the town. When we have to clean out drains or repair pipes, this truck is a valuable resource. Our bucket truck over here, that's how we get up and trim trees and take down trees and remove hazardous limbs and that sort of thing. But you got to have a truck to do that. And then the bottom left, you got a sweeper truck. Again, we're mandated through permits to sweep our streets. Besides the aesthetic, value of cleaning your streets, we're also required to clean our streets and to remove pollutants so they don't go into our stormwater. So I show these pictures because it's not, when we say we have 55 vehicles or whatever the number is, it's not as easy as just saying a number of trucks, because they all have different unique requirements and costs. And I think it's helpful to understand that in context when we come and ask for 4 vehicles or whatever the number is, and we say it's going to cost, several $100,000. This is why. So the average age of our vehicle fleet is, our vehicles are about 14 years old. And that's just for the 55 listed here. So we do have additional vehicles that aren't listed. So specialty vehicles like a paving machine, hydro seeder, we have a bunch of trailers. Those things are all in many cases, much older. And so that 14-year-old average probably goes up to closer to 20. Again, just important to understand. So if we take these 55 vehicles and we apply an asset management approach to them, then if we replace 4 vehicles a year, which is what we replaced this year. So at the last town meeting, we had 4 vehicles approved for purchase. If we take that same approach this year, which is what we're asking, and continue that to some degree moving forward, then we're talking about a 14-year life cycle for a vehicle. And I'll show in the next slide that the typical life cycle is about 10 years for a vehicle. So we're a little over that, and that's okay. But at some point we need to recognize that it's time to replace a vehicle. And I'm just giving you some context here, like I've said. Once we order a vehicle, I think this is important to note too, that so even if we are supported in our request and March town meeting approves 4 vehicles to be purchased, we're still probably 8 to 12 months away from actually getting that vehicle, even if we order it right away. And that's just based on the production time and the delivery time. And so if we say, we support something tonight and we say it's 33 years old, which is one of our vehicles, well, we're still talking probably 34, pushing 35 years by the time we actually get that vehicle on ground. And then not necessarily related to a funding request, but I think it's important to highlight that all of these vehicles, these 55 plus those 18, plus all of our police cruisers and town vehicles from other departments outside of the fire department and the school department are maintained by 2 mechanics we have here. And that's a pretty intense workload for them, and they do a great job. But I think that we as a town want to attract quality employees, and we want to show our employees that we have that we are doing what we can to not give bright shiny new vehicles to everybody, but do our best to maintain a fleet that's appropriate for the town. So this is our plan for our vehicle fleet. I'll explain this chart to you. So on the left here is the list of vehicles, and these are the pictures you just saw. So the different types of essentially sub-fleets that we have. And this is the number we have of each type. This is the average age. I'll explain the colors in a minute. And then this is the recommended life cycle. And so we took this from the Government Accounting Standards Board. So generally it's about 10 years. That's a recommended life cycle for a vehicle of the type that we have. And then I just showed the youngest and oldest, and you can see we have some pretty old ones in here. And then if you look from 21 out to 26, we can see how we've allocated our requests or what we think our plan is. So this year, for 21, the town supported at the last town meeting 4 new vehicles. We also we haven't received them yet, but we expect to in the next couple of months, 2 new vehicles here, these 1-ton dumps, and those were purchased through a grant. So we did pay a matching fund for that. We paid about $30,000 for 2 trucks that are typically about $80,000 a piece. So through the grant, they picked up the remaining balance of that $30,000. So that's a good deal for the town. You can see this year for 22, we're looking at 4 vehicles, and then our path for the future. So these colors here. So we used the GASB as our standard, 10 years. So green is good, red is bad. If we're under 10 years, and we said we're good. If we're over 10 years by 0 to 3 years, we said that's not so good, but it's livable. So that's the yellow or orange. And then greater than 3 years, we said is probably not so good, and that's the vehicles listed in red. So there's a number of ways you can look at vehicles, and yes, we can look at, and we do look at mileage and hours and the condition of the body and that sort of thing. But we needed something, at least to start, and I say start meaning between now and last year when we first proposed this, to give us a baseline and have something we could compare ourselves to and have a discussion with you and the other town committees and the town itself on how we want to look at ourselves from a vehicle perspective. So that's the way we've looked at it, and frankly, I think it's working for us right now because when you have vehicles that are at the ages we have, so last year we replaced a 32-year-old vehicle. This year we have a 33-year-old vehicle. I mean, I just think that when you're talking about a vehicle that was delivered in 1988, and we all think about 1988 and what we were doing in 1988 and what kind of technology has, come about since then. I mean, we can do so many things better with the more updated vehicle, including the bottom line there, fuel efficiency and maintenance expenses. And so, so if we were talking about a vehicle that was 9 or 10 years old, then certainly I think there's room for discussion. But I think when you're talking a vehicle that's 3 times past its life cycle, or expected life expectancy, I think it's an easy argument for us right now. So, all right, so I'm going to go through the vehicles we have for tonight. So this one reflects 2 vehicles. So we have 2 one-ton pickups. Again, if you look at the picture, it looks like a nice truck. Just like when we go to a used car lot, the truck looks really nice on the outside. But if you look inside this thing, it's, these trucks, they've been exposed to snow and ice for a really long time. They do have life cycles. These are the workhorses for the department in terms of the use they get and by everybody. And so, it is what it is to me. And this is 2 of the trucks. This is our maintenance truck. We have one. If you were to look in the back of the bed of this truck, where that crane is showing, there's an empty bed back there, but it's full of holes that have just been rotted out. I mean, it's from 1999, so it's pretty old, and it's done great things for us. And we do our best to maintain it, but we're putting money into a truck that we're not going to get anything back from when we get rid of it. So if we can replace it, we'll have a maintenance truck that is going to sustain us for a long time and replace something that's well past its lifespan. This is a loader. If you were to get in this loader right here and sit on the seat, you'd have to probably hold on to something because the seat rocks back and forth. It's been repaired and replaced so many times. Again, this one's 33 years old. It does a lot of stuff for the town, but it requires a lot of money to maintain this, and we're asking for a lot of money to buy a new one, but we're going to have a more reliable, a safer vehicle for our operators, and something that will carry us into the future. So those are the vehicles. And by all means, please, I can't see everybody's face or hands, but if somebody has a question, feel free to shout it out. So I'll just keep going unless I hear something. So the next kind of topic is related to our sewer pump stations. So we have 33 pump stations around the town, and I'll just use this little diagram here to explain it. And I know some of you have heard this before, but you've got a house or a residence or a building, and it sends out its wastewater into a pipe, and that pipe flows downhill by gravity, and it goes to a station like this, and that station pumps it up so it can get to a higher point, and then it flows by gravity again, and eventually it makes its way to the treatment plant. And so we have these pump stations around the town. We're asking to install these grinders, so they're basically just metal teeth that chew up things that enter them, just like a chipper. Unfortunately, in many cases, it's not a residence. It's probably coming from commercial places, but there's a lot more things that go down our sewer pipes than just what you'd expect to go down a sewer pipe. And so those things create clogs in our pipes and in our pumps. And so these pump stations have pumps that pump the sewage up to get to the higher point for gravity. So those pumps get clogged. And a clogged pump not only means we have to send people in to clean them out and stick their hands in there and pull all this stuff out, which is not good, but it also adds wear and tear to our pumps, decreases the life expectancy of those pumps. And one way to mitigate that is to install these grinders. So the grinders will chew all that stuff up before it gets to the pump, and then ideally it flows to the pump easily. We've purchased over the last 4 years, 4 grinders and installed them, or in the process of installing one since we just got one approved recently. We're not proposing that, we spend the next 20 years buying grinders, but we do think that we need to get to a point where we have about a third of our stations with grinders. And these stations are all around town. They're form a network, and so some stations flow into other stations. So there's a whole thought process behind which stations would need a grinder, but we certainly think we need one, at least another one for this year. And so
this is Tim Taylor. Just about that.
Sorry, Tim, I didn't hear what your question was.
I think Tim might be frozen.
Are you back with us, Tim?
I think you're having trouble hearing my audio, correct?
We can hear you now.
I think you're back now.
Okay. There was an instability there. I'm wondering about, you said you wouldn't want grinders for all the pump stations, but about a third. So it seems like an essential piece of equipment. You validated it with the 4 you've put in. What goes to, is it all location to determine that if you had 33% versus 50% of the stations outfitted?
Yep.
What kind of goes into that?
It's based on location. So, so if you look at this diagram here, if you, if you added a couple more stations, maybe upstream, depending on the flow, you may get, and it's kind of driven by how much flow gets to the station and where it's coming from. And so some stations we know that are in maybe a small residential area and the flow isn't very high, and we don't have an issue with significant debris type things coming through the sewer, then we don't necessarily need to invest in a sewer grinder. But when we know it's in a dense area and it's getting, the YMCA is a good one. I mean, it's not active, super active right now, but any place where you have the kind of high flush toilets where you can send just about anything down the toilet, we get it. And so it's really on location. I mean, I'm not trying to be gross about it or anything. It's unfortunate, but it's what it is. And so it's really driven by location.
Hi, Chris. This is Andrew. Can you hear?
Yep.
So in the past, the conversation around grinders has also been buttressed by conversations about the number of times or evidence about the number of times that something has clogged up that required, attention. Because the reality is a $60,000 investment is totally worth it if it saves $60,000 worth of work, over the course of time. And obviously these things are supposed to last 20 years. So, math it out, you figure out the ones that are the highest clogging are certainly the ones that need the most attention. Do you have any data that would suggest which ones you're choosing and why in terms of the order of replacement? Because I do believe going back about 3 years preceding you, that was information we used to have as we looked at this investment.
So we probably, so we did some math. This is a little bit dated by months, not by years, but by months. And we're probably spending about 80 grand on overtime to come in on weekends and at night to clean out pumps. And so I don't have numbers specifically in front of me, but typically those clogs it doesn't just happen kind of across all 33. There are specific stations that tend to clog more frequently than others. And so I guess between those two data points, between the cost of bringing people in on overtime to fix pumps and the data that typically shows us, out of those 33, there's a specific few where the clogs occur most, that drives the decision for the number of grinders and also locations. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. You're getting towards what I think would be helpful to see. And obviously we're still early in this. We're about halfway through the goal of having about a third of them. But just when the time is right to present this, obviously with each one we put in, we're addressing the most pressing issues. So every one we add is of value, hopefully greater than $60,000 worth of value, but it's less value than the one before because we're not dealing with ones that clog up as often. So if there's a way you could present it, these are our 33 stations, these are the ones with grinders, these are the ones that have the number of times that they're clogging up on an annual basis, because that would really be where we'd focus our attention. And that may be at a level of detail that is beyond what we need to be nitpicking on the CapEx side. I know it's come up in the FinCom side when we discuss these things. So just as a thought for being able to present it on a station by station basis.
Okay. Yeah. Good point.
Thank you.
I'll just, I guess, stay on this. Any other questions on this one? Okay. So related to those pump stations, they all work off of electricity. And when the grid goes down, which it frequently does around town for various reasons, or if there's even just a surge in the system, it could potentially cause the pump station to trigger turning to its backup energy supply, which is a generator. So these generators provide backup power to all of our stations. So this request is to replace a generator at one of our stations. They're pretty important because when the power does go out, we still need to move the wastewater. Otherwise, it collects, and then at some point, depending on the station itself and the size of the well it has, that sewage will overflow or back up in the pipe. And so these generators help us, are one way that we help prevent that from happening. With 30 plus stations, we're not proposing that every single year for the next 30 years, we're going to buy a generator, but again, applying the methodology of an asset and managing it over a lifespan. If we did do a generator every year, it would take us 33 years to replace them all if we did one a year. So we just want to be smart about how we're approaching it. And so we have, over the last, I believe, 2 to 3 years, replaced multiple generators, and we think we should continue that at least for this coming year and probably the next several years, just to make sure we're sustaining something that is going to allow these things to work for us when the time is required. And I guess it's also important to note that the last couple we've asked for have been in the $30,000 to $35,000 range, but all of these pump stations are not exactly the same. And so this would be the high end. There are several stations with smaller generators. So the 30-year life cycle and that line on the slide there that says, you know, it could take us 30 years. That's not necessarily true, which is why we wouldn't ask for one every year. But again, I just want to reinforce the point that we're looking at this as an asset, and it has a life cycle, and we need to program this out. And in some cases, we might be able to get, you know, this generator for $35,000, which we can't buy out of our budget, but a smaller generator that's maybe $4,000, we could also replace in the same year, pulling it out of our operating budget. And so we're looking at all options, and we want to do it the smartest way possible to make it the best for the town and save money where we can. But in this case, we need another generator, and this is where we are with it. Okay, and this is the last chart we have. So the town, as you all know, has several buildings, and Jim Stewart is responsible for maintaining all of these buildings. So the ones pictured here, the Country Club, the Harvey Building, the Forbes Community Building, are all old buildings that have had various purposes over the past decades. And the Harvey Building, for example, it says 9 years hosting the Players Club. So if you've ever been in that building, it's quite old. I think Jim said he went to kindergarten or something there. I mean, it's been around for a while, and it was here a long time before his kindergarten age, I'm sure. So it's been used by this, you know, the community chorus. So the use of that building is not super intense, but it's still a building. And just like any other asset, as years pass, you know, there are things that need to be replaced. So in this case, there's some roof work that needs to be done. If you go inside the building, there's ADA compliance issues. So depending on what the town wants to do with this building down the road, we might have to address issues beyond just the roof, which is, in my view, a necessity if you want the building to last, but things inside the building might need to be addressed as well. And before investing a lot of money into any of these buildings, we're recommending that we take a look at each of these buildings through a professional, a consultant, and do a condition assessment, which is an industry standard. I mean, that's typical for people that manage facilities, is to get an outside source, if you don't have the expertise within your organization, which we don't, to do a top to bottom assessment, to look at the outside of the building, the structure, look at the inside, at the mechanicals, the HVAC, ADA issues, and just tell us, you know, where we are with these buildings. And then once we get that, the town, we believe, can make smart decisions on where we want to invest money or not invest money in regards to these buildings. But what, at least I think personally, is a piecemeal solution where we just kind of band-aid things over time is probably going to come back to us down the road when these buildings that may not have an intense use now, but we decide down the road that we want it to have a more intense use. So the Harvey Building, if it's repurposed for something, for office space or for some other purpose, it's going to require a significant amount of money to get it to a point where it's functional for that purpose. And we think that it would be helpful for us to already have an idea of what that cost might be before we continue to invest more money in these buildings, because I have no idea if this is the case, but that Country Club building, it's been kind of hacked together over years and decades, and it's kind of had various ownership in terms of who's responsible for what. And so it could be, and I have no idea if this is true, I'm just, you know, throwing it out there. Somebody could come in and say, you know what, it would save you more money just to tear the whole thing down and build a new building, something that you want, as opposed to the retrofit that's required to make it serve the purpose that we might want it to in the future. And again, I don't have any idea if that's true. I'm just suggesting that we spend a little money now, figure out where we are with these buildings, and and then make smart decisions moving forward and how we want to tackle any issues that we have. But we know we have issues. We know at the country club, the siding is falling off. The windows, you can, I was in there the other day actually, and you can, on the second floor, if you're looking at the window, you can certainly see through the glass, but you can look around the frame and you can also see, through the crack between the frame and the wall structure. And similar in the Harvey building. There's electrical and plumbing and HVAC concerns. I mentioned the roof repairs for the Harvey building. There's definitely ADA issues if we were to use that for something more than what it's being used for now. And so with that, we think that doing a condition assessment will give us a good look at these buildings, and we can just build a smart plan going forward as to how we want to address any of these issues if we want to. Maybe there's a decision that these buildings aren't going to be used for anything down the road, but I suspect that we want to maintain these assets. Or serving a pretty good purpose for us. The Harvey building's right downtown and lots of access for people, so maybe the town wants to use it for something down the road. And we just want to be ready to respond to what the town wants. Should we be asked to make some updates, renovations, whatever the case may be. So with that, that's our pitch, and happy to discuss or answer more questions.
Hi, Chris. Andrew Bradley here again. You're talking about some of the ideas about keeping the buildings refurbished, and I think that makes a ton of sense. But it feels sort of like cart before the horse to say that we want to make sure we're putting $45,000 of necessary, what seems like really important assessment into this, without having had a conversation with the town about where they think they're going, because they're in the progress right now of doing the planning for our future planning for the town. Have there been any conversations with Christy or with anybody on planning about how these might be used in the future?
I know there's been very preliminary discussions, and I've only been on the fringe of that in terms of what these buildings could be used for. But I guess what I'm suggesting is that we would do an assessment, and what we would, so getting into kind of the detail of what the assessment would provide, a deliverable would be potentially, give us some opinion of cost on if we wanted to convert this to a office building, or if we wanted to convert it to a rec center or something like that, right? Then we could go to the finance committee, board of selectmen, whoever, and say, okay, here are your options if you wanted to pursue, some other course of action for this building. So that's one piece. But I guess the more important piece is we know we have issues with these buildings now, and they're costly. And so we have to do something in the near term, being in the next year and a half or 2 years or so, to address just the obvious things like roofs that are leaking or electrical systems that are in poor condition. And so we know we have to do that. So if we're going to do it, then the suggestion is we do that with a plan, so it's somewhat coordinated with anticipated or even speculated future uses, so we can spend the money smartly. That's just my view, but I know others on here might have more knowledge or different opinion in terms of the uses for those buildings.
Kim, did you want to comment? Did you?
Yeah, no, I'll just echo exactly what Chris said. We have had some discussions about potential uses of buildings and various needs that we know that we have, not to mention that some of those buildings are currently in use. But where that conversation and that discussion is hampered is we know we have needs, and we need to better understand, what are the dollar amounts. We know a certain set of needs, but we certainly know there are other things about the building that we need to be assessed, because that informs how far we take those discussions about uses. And that's also in part why we started, we were deliberate in the 3 buildings that we are, bringing forward as the first set of structure facilities that we want to have this assessment done.
This is Endrigan, and I should say I'm wildly in favor of making sure that these assets remain in decent working condition for whatever is planned. I think you started talking, Chris, towards what the deliverable on this investment is, the $45,000. Could you be any more concrete about like how specific they're going to be able to come back with? Is it a list of recommendations as to what needs to be done with the building to bring it up to like basic code, whether it was accessibility or anything else? I guess I would just like to know what that $45,000 is getting in terms of actionable deliverable outcomes.
So pretty much what you just said. So a list of, if you look at a facility and look at all the kind of components of a facility, so HVAC, electrical, plumbing, I don't know, there's a whole bunch more. I can't rattle them all off, but Jim could. But all of those things, look at kind of top to bottom, left to right, what do we need to do? And then that list is, here's the things you need to do right now. And here's the stuff that you're probably going to have to do soon, but it can wait. And so we could, to your point, we could tackle the few issues we know we have to do right now. So example would be a roof that's leaking. We tackle those, but those other things that might be okay to delay, we delay them until we know what the future purpose is for the building, because that might shape how we approach it. But we know everything up front, as opposed to kind of taking it step by step and just discovery learning as we're going. We're more informed about how we want to tackle the problem.
I will chime in on this too, that those buildings, well, when I took over here 3 years ago, there wasn't a capital plan for any of the town structures. Everything was always a reactive. If something went wrong, we will look for the money to fix it. I think that everybody can agree that any property that we own in town is a good investment for the town and a good asset. And these 3 particular buildings are the oldest buildings that I take care of. The Harvey building, I think it was 1883. That building was built. I actually went to first grade there, first and second grade. Forbes Community Building was kindergarten for me. And all 3 of them have their own needs. I would say that the Harvey building right now, because it is being used, it's in a lease until 2022 with the Community Chorus and Players Club. That's a valuable piece of property right in the center of town. And there's been a lot of ideas kicked around on, what should go there and what we could do with it. But as Chris said, we need to have a consultant, a trained professional come in and do a total evaluation of that building so we know exactly where we stand. I look at buildings all the time, and the roof and the second floor windows in that, well, actually all the windows, because even the first floor are old replacement windows that are probably 30 years or plus old. Those are things that I know building's going to need right up front. But before we start spending, all this money into a building, let's find out what is our goal for it. What are we going to do with it? And then do we just keep piecemealing like we've been doing, or do we put together a plan to move forward for, the next 5 years or something like that? The country club building, that's the civic part of it. The restaurant is in a lease until 2023. That particular building has electrical and plumbing issues related to the restaurant side. So my plan would be, after we have the assessment, is to hopefully, when that lease is finished, would give us time to get in there to, before the next person came in or before the Civic, if they run the bid again, they could take over. But it would give us time to get in there and take care of these issues that we can't do when there's an operating restaurant there. I'm just a reactive person. I go up there, and when I get a phone call that something's broke, we go up and fix it. And that building in particular, I spent a lot of time up there over the last few years. I just think a detailed evaluation would help not only our department, but also the town on how we want to move forward. I mean, I don't believe the country club's going anywhere, but is that building worth putting in a substantial renovation to, or is that something that, it might be, cheaper to take it down and build something just like it there, but much more functional floor plan and everything like that. But that's down the road. I think first we just need to have this evaluation done on the properties and see where we stand.
Any other questions on the building plan or?
At least I just said, more general, building planning makes a ton of sense. It's instead of spending, throwing good money after bad or whatever the saying is, I think doing the analysis and looking, to me, it's in my simplistic terms, I know this is overly simplistic, but it's kind of like when you're looking at a house to buy, you bring in a home inspector. In some ways, this is a little bit more than that, but it's similar type thing. They're going to look at everything and tell us, basically what the issues that we have are, and identify, I think as Chris and Jim said, what needs to be done immediately. What are those safety things? If you find out that, hey, your wiring is, as it could be in the Harvey building, that you could have wires in there that are 50, 60, 70 years old, who knows, especially down in the basement and upstairs, whatever, that are hazards to the property. I mean, those are things you want to know and fix. But I think putting it all together, looking at just like what we're doing here, and putting, in essence, a plan in place based on facts is a smart way to do things. And it's money well spent, because I'd hate to go in and say, yeah, we need a new roof and windows, and then decide that, we put those on, and 3 years later we decide that the building, has a foundation that's not going to hold it up for any longer. And then we, kind of wasted money of fixing it. But back to, in general, I guess, and I guess, Kim, looking at you, I know we've talked a lot in the first two meetings about this, and I know for kind of the new process we're putting in here is really kind of looking more broadly at capital expenditures. And I know, Chris, you showed a slide in there towards the beginning about the water, it was water or sewer, or both maybe, the capital plan there. I guess, came to that piece. Is that something, as we build out this process, that we're going to want to have those plans incorporated in the overall capital plan too, even though those are funding sources different than, as we talked about, but I think more broadly, that's going to be the holistic look that this committee will kind of be, have under its purview. Is that accurate?
Yes. Part of what I want to have for you soon, hopefully by your next meeting, is start to show a summary of the projects with the breakout by their funding source. So specifically the DPW that are funded over multiple sources, you'll be able to see that in one place. And then, as Chris's slide, his slide showed categorically, so while he may have $1 million worth of requests, it showed what chunk of that was free cash, what chunk was sewer, what chunk was water retained earnings. So I'm trying to pull something comprehensive for all of the projects that are in the plan.
Okay. So again, we didn't go in depth, but kind of those water and sewer projects. So like the one that just got voted, the Flanders Road work, and then the ones that were spelled out in that list. Will we have Are those will be also
Yeah.
included in future years?
Yep, they were in the
Those are-
past. In the past, they were. So if you look back
Yeah.
to last year's plan, there were water and sewer projects of that nature that were incorporated.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. So I guess, Chris, to that, is there anything else that you have? I'm not sure that there is, but it's really that plus what you've showed us, as well as the packet that we had that showed your plans for the out years 2, 3, 4, and 5, basically. But does that really capture everything in your mind?
So it doesn't capture everything if you're talking, so, and your question is a good one because, and I know we've been talking it internal to the town staff, like how do we mash all this stuff together to show you, but so you just mentioned the Flanders Road water main replacement at the last town meeting. Well, we are anticipating, although we're still working the details on it, that we're sewer wise, we're kind of looking at an alternating years. So we do a water project and the next year potentially a sewer project. And so we have some sewer work, pipe related, multi-million-dollar type scale that we need to do. And I obviously didn't talk about that here tonight. So I think you're asking, what's that calendar look like for the next 10 years? And we are putting that together, but obviously I didn't show that tonight.
Okay. I guess
other-
go ahead, Kim.
The other piece that we decided not to include in this are the Chapter 90 funds. So any of the roadwork repairs, what we've talked about, perhaps down the road, if we're seeking additional funding, once if the pavement management plan identifies X amount and we at some point determine that we would like to use additional money from free cash or whatever the source, it may be that delta that ends up as part of the plan. But for now, the normal road work and repairs that happen using that funding source are not captured in this plan.
Okay. Sorry, Lisa, I just have one more question if you don't mind.
Sure.
The one other thing, and it when Chief Purcell presented at our last meeting, one of the things that he started to look at and put in the plan is really the building maintenance for the fire facilities. I know with the 3 buildings we talked about, but I guess and whether it's not this year, but in future years, I mean, relatively new building up there, but we know we have a number of buildings on the DPW office site. And if there are, planning associated with those buildings that are more capital nature, that aren't things that you handle out of your kind of standard budget every year. I think for me personally from the committee, so when Chief Purcell did that and talked about, while we look at the fire stations, the new building, you want to keep it lasting through its lifespan. So there are things like roof inspections and parking lot work and repairing cracks in the equipment floor and stuff like that. So I guess the question is maybe you already have that, but if not, it may be something that, and whether that's going to fall to Jim or others in the DPW, maybe something we see, in next year, et cetera, but just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, so what we need is what you just said for all of our buildings, which is, building list and, 21 to 31 year, 2021 out to 2031, what are all the things we need to do over the, that life cycle to sustain the buildings we have. We don't have that right now, but we will have that. And if that gets incorporated into this process next year, that's what we'll be providing. And I don't want anybody to think that I mentioned the sewer project. We're not just winging that. I mean, when this was discussed in terms of what we were going to present as part of this process for this year, which I know is adjusted, those were decisions that were made deliberately for various reasons, but we do have a plan. I would like to see it pushed further out than it is right now, but certainly we're not just I mean, I don't want anybody to think we're arbitrarily just kind of picking things out of the sky. I mean, we have a program that we're sticking to in terms of water, sewer, roads, buildings will come. So just to hopefully reassure everybody, we're not just shooting from the hip. So
Perfect. Thanks.
I have just a couple of general questions. You mentioned that you had offset the cost of a couple of trucks with grant funding. How prevalent is grant funding in the buildings and grounds DPW world? I know that the fire department has done a fantastic job of leveraging various grant opportunities, but I never even thought that would be a possibility for a truck. So just what does that look like, and has anything changed with the pandemic, just in terms of like, FEMA funds or anything else, any other weird, upticks in funding, which Chief Purcell had actually said that their funding currently, opposite of what you'd think, is actually the opportunities are quite robust in this crisis time. So just curious.
So specific to the vehicles, it's not very frequent, but the vehicles that were funded through this grant was associated with a settlement for Volkswagen, and they were required to push out money. So we applied for that and got some money, which was great. In terms of the other opportunities for grants, there are grant opportunities. Just today, we were out on Bowman Lane where we're going to do a culvert replacement eventually. And so we have a $40,000 grant there to do that assessment, which is step one. We've, over the past 8 months or so, it's around $100,000 worth of various grants we've received for things associated with stormwater, energy assessments. We did one this summer associated with sidewalks and sidewalk ramps, ADA fixes to sidewalk ramps. So they are out there, and we are doing our best to compete for as many as we can.
That's great. Chief Purcell's really good at writing grants. Maybe he can help you out. He has a very high success rate. Second question. I apologize that I don't have these figures. I don't have the book from town meeting from last week in front of me, but in terms of the balances in the enterprise funds, what are the recommended balances, and how are we doing in terms of percentages?
Are you talking retained earnings?
The water and sewer enterprise funds, where the ratepayer money. Are there guidelines like we have in the town for free cash and other reserves? Are there guidelines of how much of a buffer you should try to keep, as opposed to just spending it all down every year? I'm just curious to know just sort of how that recycles.
So there aren't, but what I've discussed with Finance Director Leah is, so I just mentioned to Ian, a potential project next year for a sewer. It's a sewer line. It's lining a pipe. It's probably going to be, $1.5 million or whatever the case may be. So what we want to get to is a retained earnings balance that allows us over years to, so if you go back to the slide I showed at the beginning, it was a list of projects, and it showed 10 years out, and it showed, a project every year, and it costs $1 million or whatever the case may be. We want to be able to sustain those projects out of our retained earnings over time, and not have to go borrow every time we want to do $1 million project, because it just doesn't make sense financially for the town to keep doing that every year. I mean, we're paying a lot of money to pay off those loans. So I'm not necessarily answering your question specifically because it's not as refined yet as we need it to be, but the intent is to figure out what the number is that is kind of the sweet spot in terms of the balance we need to be able to sustain ourselves and do some of these substantial but not multi-million dollar projects that certainly would require a borrow, but allow us to keep pace and do the things we need to do, but not have to borrow for it. And so I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
Well, I mean, if there's no recommendation like like we have for free cash, that's fine. I was just curious to know if there was kind of like a standard or a recommendation. Do you happen to have any sense, and maybe this is a question for Kim, although Leah and Bob are not on, do you know what our balances are, like where they run from year to year after you give money to the, to the trucks, a third to this truck and a third to that truck and so on and so forth?
it's about in the $2 million range.
Okay.
Obviously it goes up and down, but that's where it's been at least over the past couple of years that I'm aware of.
So it's potentially a very good resource to leverage for some of those larger projects.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, Leah has, I'm happy to pass on to Leah that was a question at the next meeting. Maybe she can be prepared to address that. She has a big whiteboard in her office and there's a whole side of it that's dedicated to those numbers. They're right up there and she's tracking it. And then it also, that number is similar to free cash at the end of the year, depending on how much you're adding to that. And she has a sense of where that might land. How much is it prudent to pull out of that for projects. So happy to pass that on and ask her to address that next time.
Great, thank you. Those were my questions. Anyone else have any questions on the trucks, the buildings, the plan, anything?
So this is Andrew again. May I ask, go back and ask a couple of questions about the vehicles?
Sure.
For the conversation about the trucks, for starters, there was, I think you had one slide where you mentioned the 55 vehicles. On it, you mentioned that a number of the vehicles were purchased used. For the purpose of the aging of the vehicles, if, say, for example, a 5-year-old vehicle was used and we've had it for 2 years, is that a 7-year-old vehicle or a 2-year-old vehicle?
We base the age on the actual age of like the
Perfect.
manufacture date of the vehicle.
Okay, so the question then goes, I'm hoping then goes to, there was one instance where we had the cleaners of the sewers. That's not the sewers. You had a vehicle. We had 2 vehicles. One of them was 2 years old. The other one was 33 years old.
Yeah.
And it looked like there was no interest in doing any replacement in the immediate term for the 33-year-old one, at least in the 5-year plan that was laid out. Is this something we can live with only one vehicle working?
Yep. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
We're looking at the entire fleet, and kind of the reason for showing you that slide with all those different pictures is because we want to look at these things individually by their own sub fleet, and in some cases we may not need what we have right. So we have, like you described, a vehicle that's 2 years old and a vehicle that's 33 years old. I'm not necessarily sure we need both of those going forward. So to your point, it's not on that capital plan because we have a functioning vehicle that's only 2 years old.
Yep.
And we may just hang on to that 33-year-old vehicle till it goes and then just not replace it.
Okay. And the idea of having purchased used vehicles in the past, I think everything we've seen so far has been a discussion of purchasing fully new vehicles. Is that a strategy we have going forward to only stick with new vehicles?
I think we're open to all options, and So it could be purchasing used, it could be leasing vehicles or renting vehicles down the road. The vehicles that we purchased or had approval for this year at the last town meeting, and the 4 vehicles we're moving forward with now, they're kind of the foundational vehicles for us. And so to me, it makes sense. I think to all of us, it makes sense to move forward with new vehicles for them. There are some vehicles in the fleet that maybe aren't as used as frequently, or their purpose is very singular, where it would make sense to buy that vehicle used. But the vehicles that we're proposing, the ones we just got approved and the ones we're proposing now, are absolutely ones we need. It makes sense to me to buy new, although we should consider used in the future where it makes sense in terms of, the type of vehicle and the use of it and how frequently it's used and that sort of thing.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And one last question, if I may. Generally speaking, when you're looking at capital like vehicles, you can get the very bare basic versions, or you can get the Cadillac versions with a lot of bells and whistles. What's your strategy in terms of how you come to determining where on that spectrum we tend to like focus on trying to pay for our vehicles?
It's probably, it's not the, whatever you described as the cheap side or the less expensive side. But we're certainly not going for the Cadillac. So we want something that's functional and is going to, withstand the uses that we have for these vehicles. So I don't know exactly how to answer other than to say that we're certainly not going for Cadillacs, but we aren't going to get something that's, we went the inexpensive route, but now it doesn't last us, beyond the first use of it kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I appreciate the details.
Okay, any other questions?
I just want to say, Chris, you did an excellent job on this presentation. And I have one question about something we didn't go over, is these water towers. How often are those painted?
It's about 10 to 12 years, but it kind of depends on location and exposure to, various elements, and, whether in the woods or, on top of a hill without any obstructions. But yeah, it's about 10 to 12 years.
Great, thank you.
Okay, last call for any other questions, comments. Okay, thank you to everyone who came to join us, who outnumbered the actual committee. Thanks for joining. We did have on our agenda to review minutes, but they are not complete yet, so we're going to skip over that until next time. At this point, if there's nothing further, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, great. We'll take a vote. I vote in favor. Ian?
Johnson, yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Andrew?
Bradley, yes.
I think that's all of us tonight. Oh no, I'm sorry, Leah. So sorry.
McLean, yes, thank you.
Okay, great. We have a unanimous vote to adjourn. Next meeting is next Monday at 5:30. See you then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
W team. Thank you.
Bye.